On the morning of his daughter's wedding, an elderly father was suddenly locked inside a car trunk by his own trusted driver. But the driver whispered only one sentence. "Don't say a word. Trust me." He thought he had been betrayed, until he discovered that the wedding itself was a deadly trap. Stay until the end, because this story is filled with shocking twists, hidden betrayals, and a truth that changes everything. I am Eldrick Vosmere, 62 years old, and until that morning I believed I understood every important person in my life. The day of my daughter's wedding began before sunrise. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning inside my room at the old lakeside estate we had rented for the ceremony. The estate stood several kilometers outside Greymont City, surrounded by tall pine trees and a quiet lake that reflected the pale colors of dawn. Everything looked peaceful. The weather was clear, the air was cool, and for the first time in many years, I allowed myself to feel content. My only daughter, Seraphine Vosmere, was getting married. As I stood beside the window, I looked at the garden below. Workers were arranging white flowers along the stone pathway. Several musicians were carrying instruments toward the gazebo near the lake. Catering staff moved quickly between buildings. For months, Seraphine had planned every detail of this wedding herself. She deserved happiness. After losing her mother 12 years earlier, she had carried enormous responsibilities. She became a successful environmental lawyer and dedicated most of her life to helping communities fight illegal land seizures and industrial corruption. Perhaps because of that, I worried about her constantly. She made enemies. Powerful enemies. A knock interrupted my thoughts. "Father?" I immediately smiled. "Come in." The door opened slowly. Seraphine entered wearing a simple silk robe. Her dark hair had not yet been styled, and she looked tired but happy. "You woke up early again," she said. "I could say the same about you." She laughed softly before sitting beside me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I simply looked at her. When she was little, she used to run through our house carrying books that were far too heavy for her. She always wanted to become someone who could protect others. Now she had become exactly that. "I wish your mother could see this," I finally said. Her smile became smaller. "So, do I." Silence filled the room. Then she gently held my hand. "Are you nervous?" I let out a quiet laugh. "I think fathers are allowed to be nervous on their daughter's wedding day. And here I thought you feared absolutely nothing." "I never said that." She smiled again. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Then my phone vibrated. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Something compelled me to answer. "Hello." There was no response. Only breathing. Slow breathing. Then the call ended. I frowned. "Who was it?" Seraphine asked. "No idea." I placed the phone back into my pocket. Perhaps it was nothing. At least I wanted to believe it was nothing. A few minutes later, Seraphine stood. "I should get ready." I nodded. As she reached the door, she suddenly stopped. "Father?" "Yes?" "If anything strange happens today." She hesitated. "Promise me you'll trust me." I stared at her. The words felt unusual. "What do you mean?" She forced a smile. "Nothing. Forget it." Before I could ask more questions, she left the room. I remained seated. An uncomfortable feeling settled inside my chest. Something was wrong. I simply could not explain what. At 7 in the morning, guests began arriving. The estate became lively. I greeted old friends, former colleagues, and distant relatives. My younger sister, Maribel Vosmere, was everywhere at once, giving instructions to staff members and making sure everything proceeded according to schedule. She looked elegant in a dark green dress. "Everything is ready," she told me proudly. "You've done an excellent job." She smiled warmly. "Today will be perfect." At the time, I believed her. Around 8:30, I finally met my future son-in-law. Lucien Vale approached me with his usual polished appearance. He wore an expensive gray suit and carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to influence. "Eldrick," he said politely. "How are you feeling?" "Like every father on this day." He laughed. "I promise I'll take good care of her." I looked directly into his eyes. "I expect nothing less." For a brief moment, his expression changed. Only for a second. Then his smile returned. Of course. After he walked away, I noticed someone standing near the parking area. Darian Quill, our family driver. He had worked for us for almost 15 years. But something about him seemed different. He looked pale. Extremely pale. He kept looking around nervously. Then our eyes met. He immediately began walking toward me. Fast. Too fast. When he finally reached me, his breathing was uneven. Sir, he said quietly. Is something wrong? He looked over his shoulder. Then back at me. His voice became even lower. Please come with me immediately. I frowned. What happened? He swallowed hard. You cannot stay here. The words made no sense. I stared at him in confusion. But the expression on his face frightened me. I had never seen Darian look terrified. Not once in 15 years. Sir, he whispered. We don't have much time. I followed Darian toward the parking area, without saying another word. The morning air suddenly felt colder. Guests continued chatting near the garden, completely unaware that anything was wrong. Laughter echoed from the terrace. Musicians were testing their instruments. Staff members carried flower arrangements from one building to another. Everything appeared normal. Yet Darian's expression told a completely different story. As soon as we reached the row of parked vehicles near the rear entrance of the estate, he stopped. Sir, he said quietly, whatever happens next, please remain calm. I stared at him. Darian, explain yourself. Instead of answering, he looked toward the main building again. His face turned pale. Oh no! I turned around. Several men in formal suits had just stepped out from the mansion. I recognized one of them immediately. Lucien. The others were strangers. They did not look like wedding guests. Their movements were too deliberate, too coordinated. One of them appeared to be speaking into an earpiece. Darian? He suddenly grabbed my arm. Forgive me. Before I could react, he opened the trunk of the black sedan and pushed me inside. What are you doing? He quickly threw a thick blanket over me. My anger exploded. Have you lost your mind? Let me out immediately. Then he leaned closer and whispered words that instantly silenced me. Sir, if they see you right now, your daughter may die. I froze. For several seconds, I could only hear my own breathing. What did you just say? Please trust me. Darian. No time. He lowered his voice even further. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Then the trunk closed. Darkness surrounded me. I could barely move. My heart pounded violently against my chest. What was happening? Who were those men? Why would Seraphine be in danger? Several minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps outside. Voices. At least 4 or 5 people. One of them belonged to Lucien. He hasn't been seen? Another man answered. Not yet. Lucien sounded irritated. Find him before the ceremony begins. A chill ran through my entire body. Were they looking for me? Why? Another unfamiliar voice spoke. The documents are ready. Once she signs them, everything will proceed smoothly. Documents? I slowly shifted beneath the blanket. Every instinct told me not to move. But curiosity and fear were stronger. Very carefully, I found a small opening near the edge of the trunk. Through the narrow crack, I could see part of the parking area. Lucien stood only a few meters away. 3 men in dark suits surrounded him. One of them was holding a leather briefcase. This was not a normal wedding conversation. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The father must not interfere, one of the men said. Lucien nodded. He won't. My breathing became heavier. Interfere with what? Another man opened the briefcase. I could see papers. Many papers. Contracts. The transfer agreement is prepared. Transfer agreement? Lucien crossed his arms. Good. What if she refuses? Lucien remained silent for several seconds. Then he smiled. A smile that I had never seen before. Cold. Calculated. She won't. At that exact moment, I realized something terrifying. I did not know this man at all. The person my daughter intended to marry might be a complete stranger. Footsteps approached again. This time, another voice entered the conversation. A female voice. I immediately recognized it. Maribel, my younger sister. There are too many guests, she said nervously. This is becoming risky. Lucien looked annoyed. It will be over soon. You promised nobody would get hurt. No one has to get hurt. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Why was my sister speaking with them? Why did she sound frightened? The conversation continued. The sedative is prepared, one of the men said. Sedative. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. Then Lucien replied calmly. Only enough to make her compliant. Every muscle in my body tensed. My daughter. They were talking about Seraphine. I nearly pushed the trunk open. But Darian's words echoed inside my mind. If they see you right now, your daughter may die. I forced myself to remain still. A few moments later, footsteps moved away. Silence returned. Then I heard distant music. The wedding ceremony preparations had begun. Suddenly, another set of footsteps approached the vehicle. The trunk remained closed. Someone stood outside. I held my breath. Then I heard crying. Very soft crying. A woman. Maribel. I don't want this anymore, she whispered. Lucien answered coldly. You should have thought about that before accepting the money. Money? My heart sank. No one said it would become this serious. You're already involved. I only wanted my debts cleared. Debts? I could barely process everything. My own sister had accepted money? For what? Lucien's voice became harder. If you betray us now, everything about your financial situation becomes public. Silence. Then Maribel spoke again. What happens after today? You will receive what you were promised. And Eldrick? Several seconds passed. Then Lucien answered. He will understand eventually. The way he said those words frightened me more than shouting ever could. Their footsteps disappeared. I remained frozen inside the trunk. My entire world had suddenly changed. The wedding. My future son-in-law. My own sister. None of it made sense anymore. Then, after several more minutes, I heard something else. A scream. A woman's scream. It came from somewhere near the greenhouse. I immediately recognized the voice. Seraphine. I pushed against the trunk instinctively. Damn it! Another scream followed. Then sudden silence. At that exact moment, I heard hurried footsteps approaching the car. The trunk opened. Bright light blinded me. Darian stood there. His face looked even paler than before. Sir, he said. We're out of time. I climbed out immediately. What happened to my daughter? He looked toward the greenhouse. Then he said words I never expected to hear. Everything you know about this wedding is a lie. For several seconds, I simply stared at Darian. The scream I had heard still echoed inside my mind. Seraphine. My daughter had screamed. What do you mean everything is a lie? I demanded. Darian looked around nervously. We can't stay here. Answer me. He swallowed hard. The wedding itself is real. But Lucien's intentions are not. I grabbed his arm. Where is my daughter? In the greenhouse. Then why are we standing here? I immediately started moving, but Darian stopped me. If you run there now, you'll ruin everything. I turned toward him in disbelief. My daughter may be in danger. I know. Then let go of me. His eyes suddenly filled with frustration. Sir, I am trying to save her. His voice was louder than I had ever heard. For the first time in 15 years, Darian Quill looked genuinely desperate. I slowly stopped. He lowered his voice again. Please, trust me for another few minutes. I looked directly into his eyes. There was fear there, but there was also sincerity. Finally, I nodded. Darian exhaled heavily. Come with me. He led me toward the old boathouse near the lake. The place had once been used for storing fishing equipment, but now it stood mostly abandoned. Dust covered the windows, and the wooden floor creaked beneath our feet. As soon as we entered, Darian locked the door behind us. Now talk. He nodded. 3 weeks earlier, according to him, Seraphine had asked him to drive her to a private meeting in Greymont City. During that meeting, she accidentally discovered documents connecting Lucien's family to several illegal land acquisitions. Entire villages had reportedly been forced to sell protected lands through intimidation and fraudulent contracts. Millions of dollars were involved. But why would Seraphine investigate that? I asked. Because one of the affected communities contacted her law firm. I slowly sat down. None of this sounded impossible. My daughter had spent years fighting exactly these kinds of cases. Darian continued. At first she thought it was only another corruption case. And then, she found Lucien's name. Silence filled the boathouse. I suddenly remembered several occasions during the engagement when Lucien had asked strange questions. Questions about family properties. Questions about old investment documents. Questions about lands inherited from my late wife. At the time, I thought he was simply trying to understand our family. Now those conversations felt different. Very different. Why didn't she tell me? Darian hesitated. Because she wanted proof first. I looked away. That sounded exactly like Seraphine. She never made accusations without evidence. She planned to confront him after the wedding. I frowned. After the wedding? Darian nodded. She believed Lucien genuinely loved her. I closed my eyes. Of course. That was the tragedy. Even intelligent people can be deceived by love. Then Darian revealed another shock. 2 weeks ago, someone leaked information about her investigation. I looked back at him. Leaked? Yes. Who? His expression darkened. We didn't know at first. A heavy silence followed. Outside, I could hear distant music from the estate. The ceremony preparations continued. Guests remained completely unaware. Finally, Darian spoke again. 3 nights ago, I found out. He slowly reached inside his jacket and removed a small digital recorder. I stared at it. What is that? I installed voice recorders inside the vehicles several months ago. I frowned. Why? Because expensive items kept disappearing from the estate. I blinked. What? I suspected one of the temporary staff members. He placed the recorder on the table. Instead, I recorded something else. My heartbeat quickened. Darian pressed a button. Static filled the room. Then voices emerged. The first voice made my entire body go cold. Maribel, my younger sister. He still doesn't suspect anything. Another voice answered. Lucien. Good. Keep him distracted until the ceremony. I felt dizzy. The recording continued. What about Seraphine? Maribel asked nervously. Once she signs the papers, everything will be finished. And if she discovers the truth? Lucien's answer came immediately. Then she becomes a problem. The recording ended. I could not move. I could not speak. My own sister. The woman who had comforted my daughter after her mother's death. The woman who had spent every holiday with us. The woman currently organizing this wedding. She had betrayed us. No. I whispered. Darian remained silent. I slowly sat down. Memories flooded my mind. Maribel offering to help with wedding preparations. Maribel insisting on handling guest arrangements. Maribel encouraging Seraphine to trust Lucien. How long had this been happening? How long had she lied to us? Why? I finally asked. Darian looked at me sadly. Debt. I stared at him. She owes a large amount of money. I could hardly believe it. Maribel had always lived comfortably. Then I remembered. Over the past 2 years, she had frequently traveled overseas. She had purchased expensive jewelry. She had invested in several failed businesses. I had assumed she was financially secure. Apparently, I was wrong. Lucien promised to clear her debts. The room suddenly felt smaller. Everything was beginning to make sense. But one question remained. What exactly are these papers they want Seraphine to sign? Darian looked directly at me. The inheritance transfer documents. I froze. My late wife's protected lands. The family trust. Several environmental reserves. Properties worth hundreds of millions. Everything. I slowly looked up. So this marriage, Darian nodded, was never about love. At that exact moment, footsteps suddenly sounded outside the boathouse. Both of us immediately became silent. Another set of footsteps followed. Someone was approaching. Then we heard a familiar voice. A woman's voice. Soft. Shaking. Eldrick? I immediately stood up. My heart nearly stopped. It was Maribel, and she sounded terrified. I immediately moved toward the door. Darian grabbed my arm. Wait, it's my sister. Exactly. I looked at him. His expression was tense. What if this is a trap? Before I could answer, Maribel spoke again from outside. Eldrick, please. I know you're in there. Her voice was trembling. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then I slowly opened the door. Maribel stood outside the boathouse. The elegant and composed woman from earlier had completely disappeared. Her makeup was slightly ruined, her eyes were red, and her hands were shaking. The moment she saw me, tears immediately filled her eyes. Eldrick. I stared at her coldly. You lied to us. She lowered her head. I know. You betrayed Seraphine. More tears appeared. I know. You worked with that man. Her lips trembled. I never wanted this to happen. Anger surged through me. Then explain. My voice echoed across the lake. For a moment, Maribel looked as though she might collapse. Finally, she spoke. Lucien knows everything. I frowned. What does that mean? She looked directly at me. He knows about your late wife's documents. A chill ran through my body. Only a few people knew the truth about those documents. Years ago, my wife had created a legal structure that prevented several protected lands from being sold without multiple family approvals. If Lucien gained control of Seraphine's shares, he could challenge those protections in court. But there was something even more dangerous. One hidden file. A file containing evidence against several powerful businessmen involved in illegal land exploitation years earlier. My late wife had secretly gathered those records before her death. Very few people knew they existed. How does Lucien know about them? Maribel closed her eyes. I told him. Silence. I felt my chest tighten. Why? She began crying. Because I was desperate. Her voice cracked. 3 years ago, I invested in several companies. Everything failed. Then I borrowed money. I remained silent. I borrowed from dangerous people. Darian's expression darkened. How much? Maribel looked down. Nearly $4 million. I stared at her. 4 million. The amount was almost unbelievable. I was afraid, Eldrick. She wiped her tears. They threatened me. They followed me. They said they would ruin me. So you sold your family instead? The words came out harsher than I intended. She flinched. I thought Lucien only wanted information. Only information? I didn't know he planned all of this. I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But after everything I had heard, I no longer knew what to believe. Then Maribel suddenly looked toward the estate. Her face turned pale. Oh no. What is it? They've started. A terrible feeling immediately settled inside me. What do you mean? The signing. I stepped closer. What's signing? They're taking Seraphine to the greenhouse. My heart nearly stopped. Now. She nodded frantically. Lucien changed the schedule. I immediately turned toward the estate. Darian quickly followed. But before we could leave, Maribel grabbed my sleeve. There is something else. I looked back at her. Her face had become even paler. The police are coming. What? I heard Lucien make a call. My stomach tightened. He reported you. For several seconds, I simply stared at her. Reported me? He told the police that you became mentally unstable and kidnapped your own daughter to stop the wedding. I could hardly process her words. He created evidence. What evidence? Fake messages. Fake recordings. Witness statements. Darian cursed under his breath. Everything suddenly became clear. That was why Lucien wanted me hidden. That was why his men were searching for me. The moment I appeared, the police would likely believe I was the criminal. And while I defended myself, Seraphine would be forced to sign everything. The plan was terrifyingly simple. I looked toward the estate. Music continued playing. Guests were smiling. Nobody had any idea what was happening behind the scenes. Then another sound reached us. Sirens. Very faint, but unmistakable. The police were already approaching. Darian looked at me. We're running out of time. I nodded. Then something unexpected happened. Maribel suddenly reached inside her handbag. Both of us instinctively stepped back. but she only pulled out a small flash drive. She extended it toward me. What is this? Insurance. I frowned. She swallowed hard. A week ago, I realized Lucien could never be trusted. My eyes narrowed. So, I secretly copied files from his laptop. I looked at the flash drive. There are bank records, contracts, messages. Darian stepped closer. Proof. Maribel nodded. Everything. I stared at her for several seconds. If she was telling the truth, this could destroy Lucien completely. But why give it to me now? As if reading my thoughts, she spoke softly. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. Tears rolled down her face. But Seraphine does not deserve this. The sirens became louder. Time was running out. I took the flash drive. Maribel looked relieved. Then suddenly, a gunshot echoed across the estate. All three of us froze. A second later came screams. Numerous screams. Guests. Women. Staff members. Panic spread instantly. Birds flew from the trees. Music stopped. Then another sound followed. A man's voice shouting orders. Darian looked toward the mansion. His face turned white. They found us. I turned as well. Several men in dark suits were running toward the lake. One of them pointed directly at us. There. Another gunshot rang through the air. Maribel screamed. Darian immediately pushed both of us down. The bullet struck the wooden wall of the boathouse. My heart pounded violently. This had gone far beyond fraud. Far beyond blackmail. Someone wanted to silence us. And for the first time that day, I realized we might not survive long enough to save my daughter. The bullet struck the wall only a few centimeters above my head. Wood splintered everywhere. Maribel screamed again. Get down, Darian shouted. I immediately pulled my sister behind an old storage cabinet as another gunshot echoed outside. The peaceful wedding morning had become complete chaos. Through the broken window of the boathouse, I could see guests running in every direction near the estate. Some people were hiding behind vehicles, while others were desperately trying to understand what was happening. The musicians had abandoned their instruments. Several flower arrangements had been knocked onto the ground. Panic was spreading rapidly. What do we do? Maribel asked through tears. Darian looked outside. There are 4 of them. Armed, he nodded. I felt my stomach tighten. For years I had worked with businessmen, politicians, and investors. I had witnessed corruption and greed. But this was something entirely different. Lucien had prepared for violence. He had expected resistance, which meant he had never intended to leave loose ends behind. Another gunshot rang out. Glass shattered beside us. We need to move, Darian said. Where is Seraphine? I asked. The greenhouse. I immediately stood. Then I froze. The greenhouse stood nearly 200 meters away, and armed men were already approaching from the lakeside. One of them shouted, Mr. Vossmere, the police are on their way. Don't make this worse. The audacity of those words nearly made me laugh. They were trying to kill us while pretending to negotiate. Suddenly, sirens became much louder. Several police vehicles were entering the estate. For one brief moment, I felt relief. Then I remembered. Lucien had already framed me. The police might not help us at all. Darian seemed to realize the same thing. We need proof immediately. I looked at the flash drive still in my hand. Proof. That was our only chance. Maribel suddenly grabbed my arm. There is another way. I looked at her. What? The security room. I frowned. What security room? The estate has surveillance cameras. Darian's eyes widened. You're right. Maribel nodded quickly. I saw Lucien's men disconnect some cameras this morning, but not all of them. A dangerous possibility suddenly appeared. If any cameras had recorded Lucien's activities, we might be able to prove everything. Where's the room? I asked. Inside the service building behind the greenhouse. I immediately looked outside again. That direction would take us directly toward Seraphine. Perfect. And dangerous. Another shout came from outside. We know you're in there. Footsteps approached. Darian looked at me. We have maybe 30 seconds. I took a deep breath. For some reason, My mind suddenly became calm. Perhaps because fathers eventually reach a point where fear no longer matters. Only their children matter. We're leaving through the back. Darian nodded. The rear door of the boathouse led toward a narrow path beside the lake. If we moved quickly enough, we might avoid being seen.
Might.
I helped Maribel stand. She was trembling. I never wanted this, Eldrick. I looked at her for several seconds. This was not the time for anger. Not yet. Then help me save my daughter. Fresh tears appeared in her eyes. She nodded. Darian slowly opened the rear door. The path outside was empty.
Now.
We ran. The cold morning air hit my face. Behind us, men were shouting. One of them had discovered the empty room. They're running. Another gunshot echoed. The bullet struck the ground near my feet. Maribel cried out. We kept running. Branches scraped against my suit as we moved along the lakeside path. The estate looked completely different now. People were screaming. Police officers had entered the property. Several guests pointed toward us. Some appeared confused. Others looked terrified. Then I saw him. Lucien. He was standing near the greenhouse. Completely calm. As if nothing unusual was happening. As if gunshots and chaos were merely inconveniences. And beside him stood Seraphine. My heart nearly stopped. She looked pale. Unsteady. Two men stood beside her. One of them was holding documents. The other appeared to be preventing her from leaving. Even from a distance, I could tell something was wrong. She was not acting naturally. The sedative. They had already given it to her. Dad. Her voice barely reached me, but I heard it. And she had seen me. Lucien turned. The moment our eyes met, his expression changed. For the first time that day, he stopped smiling. Eldrick. He slowly adjusted his jacket. Then he did something unexpected. He raised one hand and smiled again. Perfect timing. I stared at him in disbelief. Police officers were now surrounding the area. One of them approached me cautiously. Mr. Vossmere, please remain where you are. Lucien immediately pointed toward me. Officer, thank God you're here. The performance in his voice was astonishing. My future father-in-law has been behaving irrationally all morning. I clenched my fists. He attempted to remove Seraphine from the ceremony. That's a lie. Lucien sighed dramatically. I didn't want this to become public. Several guests were watching now. Whispers spread everywhere. The police looked uncertain. Then Lucien spoke again. He has been under severe emotional stress for years. I stared at him. He threatened this wedding. You liar. He even became violent this morning. The officer looked at me carefully. Sir, is there anything you'd like to say? Before I could answer, another voice suddenly spoke. A weak voice. Dad. Everyone turned. Seraphine slowly stepped forward. She looked dizzy, but her eyes were focused on me. Then she looked at Lucien and whispered something that changed everything. You forgot one thing. Lucien frowned. What? With trembling fingers, Seraphine reached into the folds of her dress. Then she pulled out a tiny recording device. Her voice became slightly stronger. I knew you were lying. Silence. Absolute silence. Lucien's face slowly lost all color. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in his eyes. The entire estate fell silent. Even the police officers stopped moving. Seraphine stood unsteadily near the greenhouse, her breathing slow and uneven from whatever substance they had given her. Yet despite her condition, her eyes remained clear. Lucien stared at the small recording device in her hand. You, he whispered. A faint smile appeared on my daughter's face. You always underestimated me. One of the officers stepped forward. What is that device? Seraphine slowly raised it. A voice recorder. Lucien immediately recovered. He laughed nervously. This is absurd, but I could see it. Fear. Real fear. For the first time, his carefully controlled image was beginning to crack. You think a recorder changes anything? He asked. Seraphine looked directly at him. It records everything. Silence. A cold breeze moved across the lakeside. Guests watched without saying a word. Then Seraphine pressed a button. Static filled the air. A few seconds later, Lucien's voice emerged. Once she signs, all ownership transfers immediately. Murmurs spread among the crowd. Another voice followed. And if she refuses? Lucien answered calmly. Then increase the dosage. Gasps erupted everywhere. Several guests covered their mouths. The recording continued. What about her father? Lucien laughed softly. He'll be arrested before noon. I saw the expressions of the police officers change immediately. One of them slowly turned toward Lucien. The recording still continued. And afterward? No witnesses. No complications. Absolute silence. The meaning behind those words was obvious. No witnesses. No complications. Several officers immediately placed their hands near their weapons. Lucien's face became pale. This is manipulated, he shouted. But then another voice appeared from the recording. Maribel, I don't want anyone hurt. Lucien answered her. Then don't interfere. The recording ended. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, one of the officers looked directly at Lucien. Sir, I need you to come with us. Lucien suddenly laughed. A strange laugh. Then he looked at everyone around him. You people really think this changes anything? His calm mask finally disappeared. His expression became cold. Angry. You have no idea how many powerful people are involved. Two officers moved closer. Lucien stepped backward. Then another voice interrupted. I think they know enough. Everyone turned. A black vehicle had just entered the estate. Several men and women in dark suits stepped out. Federal investigators. One of them approached slowly while holding a badge. We've been investigating the Veil organization for 11 months. The entire crowd became even quieter. The investigator looked toward me. Mr. Vosmere, your family's evidence may have just completed our case. Lucien looked genuinely shocked. You. The investigator nodded. Bank fraud. Illegal land acquisitions. Corporate extortion. Bribery. Another investigator approached carrying several folders. And now conspiracy, attempted coercion, and attempted murder. Lucien suddenly turned and ran. But he only managed a few steps. Police officers immediately tackled him to the ground. Guests screamed. The former groom struggled violently. You idiots, he shouted. You think arresting me changes anything? No one answered. His expensive suit became covered in dirt. The man who had arrived this morning pretending to be a loving fiancé now looked completely different. Desperate. Broken. For several seconds, I simply watched. Then I heard quiet sobbing. Maribel. She had collapsed onto the grass. Her shoulders shook uncontrollably. I slowly approached her. She looked up at me with red eyes. I'm sorry. Her voice was barely audible. I'm so sorry. I remained silent. She cried harder. I ruined everything. For a long moment, I did not know what to say, because despite everything, she was still my sister. A deeply flawed and frightened woman who had allowed greed and fear to destroy years of trust. Finally, I spoke. You betrayed us. She nodded. You betrayed Seraphine. Another nod. But you also helped stop this. She looked surprised. Fresh tears rolled down her face. I don't deserve forgiveness. No, I answered quietly. You don't. Her expression collapsed. But perhaps someday you can earn redemption. She lowered her head and cried. A hand suddenly touched my arm. I turned. Seraphine. She looked exhausted. Her makeup was ruined, and she was still visibly weak. But she was safe. That was all that mattered. Without saying a word, I embraced her. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she quietly said, I thought I was going to lose you. I closed my eyes. So did I. She laughed weakly through tears. I guess this wasn't the wedding either of us imagined. I almost smiled. No. Around us, police officers continued making arrests. Several of Lucien's associates were placed into vehicles. Investigators collected evidence. Guests slowly began leaving the estate. The wedding was over, but at least my daughter was alive. 3 months later, the world looked very different. The Vale family empire collapsed completely. Numerous companies were shut down. Several politicians and businessmen connected to their operations were investigated. Lucien received multiple criminal charges and would likely spend many years in prison. As for Maribel, she cooperated with authorities. She lost nearly everything. Her properties, savings, and social reputation disappeared almost overnight. She eventually moved away from Greymont City. We still spoke occasionally. Carefully. Slowly. Trust, once broken, does not return easily. And Darian. I learned something that changed how I viewed him forever. Years earlier, when his wife became seriously ill, my late wife had secretly paid for her medical treatment. He had never forgotten that kindness. That was why he risked his own life for us. One afternoon, I asked him a question. Why didn't you simply call the police? He smiled faintly. Because I didn't know who could be trusted. I nodded. Then he looked toward the lake. But I knew one thing. What? He smiled again. Your wife would never forgive me if I failed to protect her family. For a moment, I could not speak. Some debts cannot be measured with money. Some loyalties are built over decades.